Good afternoon. I'm so delighted to be here. I'm here from the Boston area in the United States, where Bridgewater State University is located. I'll provide an abstract for the video viewers and then a little bit of context about my institution. I titled this, "I didn't think students like me got opportunities like this," from a statement I hear variations on quite a bit among our student body, but that one particular student had said to me most recently, and I realized that by using the RSD framework to address equity gaps, we were creating social justice in allowing access to students who never imagined that they would have an opportunity to be scholars. The benefits of participating in undergraduate research are most pronounced for students from traditionally underserved backgrounds, including underrepresented minorities, Aboriginal students, low-income and or first-generation to college students. Yet access to undergraduate research in much of the world, most notably in North America, but I see some evidence that it's not exclusively in North America, is still favoring economically advantaged students who have family legacies of higher education and who have to opt in to high-level research opportunities or to be invited by professors. So scaffolding research throughout required components of the curriculum I see as key to addressing those equity gaps. A professional development workshop with the goal of broadening access to undergraduate research. I've been offering at literally hundreds of institutions in the last 12 years, but more recently studying it at 8 diverse institutions of higher education in the US and Canada, and at 4 international conferences dedicated to undergraduate research in the US and Canada. Participants were introduced to the RSD framework as a means of developing their students' research skills in fair and transparent ways. They used it as a model to draft learning outcomes and pedagogical strategies that would apply universally across their programs. Using the RSD framework impelled the participants to make evident to their students how the process of inquiry and research can be undertaken by everyone, and thereby breaking down the divide in access to undergraduate research. So we have far, far to go in North America, but this is a tool that I found very powerful. So a little bit of context for Bridgewater State University. We have about 11,000 students. A large percentage are immigrants from Africa and from the Caribbean. We have a significant population of students who were displaced by the earthquake in Haiti in 2010, and Boston was one of the locations where that provided a community for Haitians. And those students who came as children are now at university, and many of them at the public. Ours is a very low cost relative to the other institutions in the region, and has an inclusive mission. We actually have social justice as part of our institutional mission to change the really vast equity gap in higher education in the US broadly, but especially in New England, where we have some of the most selective universities in the world. And our students feel, I think it's fair to say, feel like they're in the shadow of those institutions, that places like Bridgewater State have had this mission of, we were founded by Horace Mann in 1836, and Horace Mann was the father of public education in the US. So we've had that mission from the beginning for 175 plus years, and we really see it now as we want to make sure that our students get access to the kinds of things that students who are attending Brown University, which is near us, Harvard, MIT, Smith, and on, have access to. So that's our mission. These well-established benefits of participating in undergraduate research including higher rates of persistence to the degree and degree completion, academic achievement, so grade point average, but also success in all kinds of measures academically, self-efficacy, analytical and communication skills are most pronounced for students who have been underrepresented in higher education around the world. So students who are racial and ethnic minorities, Aboriginal, low income, and or first generation. I'm doing some research now on students with disabilities and students who identify as lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender. So students who in many parts of their identities might feel that they don't have access to the same things that students in the majority do. The reasons for these higher benefits seem to be that there is that tremendous support from professors when they get involved with research, mentored, guided research, and also that doing research opens up a whole nother host of advantageous opportunities, like going to conferences and networking with other scholars in their field. This reminded me of Emma's research in the first part of this session about the gains are even greater for those who started perhaps behind some of their peers. These advantageous opportunities really fall into what Bordeaux identified over 30 years ago as social capital. So the resources that are accrued through networks of influential relationships. And in many institutions of higher education, as I said, especially in North America, access to undergraduate research still favors economically advantaged students with family legacies of higher education. So this presentation lays out the benefits of more inclusive participation in undergraduate research and the barriers that have been preventing underserved students from gaining the access. It then explains how university faculty in the US and Canada are using the research skill development framework as a tool for including diverse students in the high impact practice of undergraduate research. Even though that awareness has been growing for some time about the effectiveness of diverse research teams and the power of undergraduate research to improve outcomes for our underserved students, the students born into great social capital, they have parents with a high degree of educational attainment, they went to the best secondary schools, they're very well prepared for university, they are still disproportionately more likely to participate in undergraduate research. So we're aware of what the research shows, we're not quite getting there in terms of practice. Especially in North America, of course, undergraduate research opportunities have long been offered to the highest achieving students, the cream of the crop, we might say, the ones who are invited in by their professors, seen as having great potential to be a collaborator, to work, as many say, as a junior colleague with their professors, producing publishable research. And to take that on, think of all the things that have to be present first. They have to be excellent academically from the outset. There's almost no room for a runway to improve. They have to demonstrate interest in the professor's research. Some professors will even say they must come to my office and express interest in my research. So the kind of moxie or confidence that would be required for a student to do those kinds of things immediately is eliminating most of our students. They also need to volunteer a substantial amount of time outside of the classroom to participating in research. So anyone who is working to pay for their schooling, anyone who has family responsibilities, et cetera, who has a long commute to campus, just throws up their hands. You know, there's no way that they could possibly do that. We find at Bridgewater State, for example, that most of the laboratory sciences, we have a $100 million new science center with state-of-the-art equipment and opportunities for students to participate in research. And what we were finding was that it still were white students with what we would call continuing generation students. So they have parents with degrees, were accessing those research opportunities. Well, almost all of them are held on Friday afternoons. There are no lab courses taught on Friday afternoons, so science students have big open stretches of time to make progress on the research, right? Because some of that just requires the time at the bench. And they are holding jobs at that time because they have a full stretch of hours open. And we found that that students who are first generation tend to have jobs in like the service industry and hospitality industry. And for the US anyway, that is really ramped up Friday afternoons. So there's no way you can miss work to do research if you are working class. So we've had to do some structural things around that. The norm for students in the UK and Australia to engage in research as part of their curriculum is still not common practice in the US. Some institutions are notably working very intentionally at that, but they are unusual. There is a sense that students cannot make original discoveries as undergraduates, so we would be fooling ourselves to think that they could actually do this in the curriculum. So the curriculum is for prescribed research training, if you will, or you might call it research, but it's not really aimed at letting students have an open-ended inquiry. The professor will keep fairly tight control on what those outcomes are going to be. Very similar to, for those who heard Mick's talk yesterday, the lower left quadrant of that grid, which is very lecture heavy. So a problem with that, besides the fact that very few can participate, is of course that researchers around the world have shown that there are unconscious biases at work when anyone is being selected for opportunities. You have to be really vigilant about that. People around the world tend to choose collaborators with whom there's the smallest perceived social distance or cultural and behavioral difference. So we, as humans, we tend to form groups with people who are most like ourselves. We have deep-seated biases. That's who we are as human beings, and those make us more trusting of people who look most like us, who think like us, with whom we perceive having the most in common. So you see how this squares out. We have faculty in higher education who are largely white, upper to middle class, and who usually have a legacy of higher education themselves, choosing students who look very much like themselves, unless they're intentionally working against that. So the other piece that I have found really interesting in some research is that Western higher education faculty tend to value what researchers call independent social norms. They like students who act of their own volition, who are independent of expectations, who want to make an impact in the world, very self-directed, self-motivated, whereas what researchers have shown that these values are aligning with how Western parents of high socioeconomic status are raising their children just in those ways, with a great sense of self-worth, individual preference, control over your own lives, right? You have all the resources you need to exercise your personal decisions. And our indigenous students and our working class students are more often, of course these are vast generalizations, more often raised with interdependent social expectations. They tend to be more focused on the needs of their family and community than their own preference. They have more limited personal resources and therefore fewer chances than their affluent peers to exercise their preferences and controls. So I think that the solution to this, the most significant means of broadening access to undergraduate research, is to scaffold this in the curriculum. And Mick Healy and Alan Jenkins have said all undergraduate students in all higher education institutions should experience learning through and about research and inquiry through a research active curriculum. And Angela Brew also has found that, especially because the benefits are evident when students get an inclusive, scholarly, knowledgeable community, the classroom provides an excellent space for that. So although they haven't been, this has not been customary in North America, it's changing, especially because of what some of us have called a moral imperative or a social justice mission to involve more students in undergraduate research. So these workshops that I've been leading have focused on, or have used RSD as a tool, and I've been saying it's not only a map for developing students' research skills in fair and transparent ways. It is, it's fantastic for that, but it's also a tool or a form of social capital, that we bring students into these shared values in the academy, and all students therefore have access to them. Okay, so I'm out of time before I get to the points of resistance, but maybe those will come up in questions, the resistance that I've been having from faculty, and then how the RSD can help us respond to those things. Thank you. Oh, ask me about the main points of resistance. Yeah. So when I've found that when I've been leading these workshops, some faculty, of course, are just hungry for models and tools, and they would like case studies and things, and I'm always pointing them to both the University of Adelaide, but also the Higher Education Academy, McKeely's organization, their websites for these models. But some have said, well, I'm already doing research with my students, so I don't need this. And it's because they're assigning papers that require library research, but so I have to work with them about what pushes it beyond a prescribed assignment in which certain responses would be correct as opposed to inquiry-based. And the other would be, well, our students do capstones or an undergraduate dissertation, so that's undergraduate research, and sort of thinking like the people teaching that course or those kinds of courses are handling it. And again, not scaffolding, not seeing the ways in which those skills need to be developed from the outset, because you're privileging the students who had very strong secondary school preparation.